Welcome into Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolf here. No Gavin today, but I do have a great guest along with me, Nathan Grubel, who you might know as at Draft Deeper on Twitter, who's the content manager at No Ceilings, where they're putting out some really great NBA draft content. And that's right, we're going to be talking about the draft today, continuing our point guard primer for the offseason, talking about some options that might be available to the Knicks in the draft this year. Although the conversation does kind of take a turn towards just guards in general because it's not the strongest point guard class ever. But we'll be getting into that next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome into Locked On Knicks, and I wanted to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking in with us on your favorite podcast provider or you've been visiting us on YouTube and seeing our smiling faces, or in the case today, just my smiling face, until I'm joined, as I said, by Nathan Grubel. You might know him as at Draft Deeper on Twitter. Again, the content manager at No Ceilings NBA, where they're doing some of, in my opinion, the best startup draft coverage out there. There's, as a guy who, runs an independent Knicks site, I have a lot of respect for an independent draft site, which also reminds me I haven't even introduced myself. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief at Knicks site The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. I'm not going to hold this up any further. We'll get right into the conversation with Nathan right now. All right, as promised, I have a great guest to talk about some of the draft prospects that the Knicks might be able to go after to address their, we'll just call it a broad guard problem, not so much a point guard problem, because we're going to talk about it as we go here, but they're maybe not this is not the best class for pure point guards. But I've gone long enough without saying his name and introducing him. I have Nathan Grubel with me at Draft Deeper on Twitter. You might know him as part of the No Ceilings Network as the content manager over there. Some of the best up-and-coming draft content out there, really. As someone who has also started his own little ambitious project focusing on one aspect of basketball, a group of people that I really respect and like the work that they're doing right now. Nathan, I've gabbed on long enough. How are you doing? How are you enjoying the draft cycle so far and everything? And I believe this is your first draft with No Ceilings, since you guys launched, or is this the second?
This would be the first. So No Ceilings launched in November. So this is overall in the media landscape. This is my third draft cycle between Deeper and then coming on No Ceilings. But we're very young, but that's not stopping us from trying to take over as much of the space as possible. In all seriousness, I really appreciate you having me on, Alex. Thank you for the invitation today. It's great. And I said this to Prez, you referenced before we started recording. I just did hop on an episode of Draft Strickland with Alex from the No Ceilings Collective as well. It's nice to interact with some Knicks people. That's like one fan base I haven't really interacted with on Twitter too much yet. And Prez was like, I don't know how much you want to interact with Knicks Twitter. And I'm like, nah, come on, man. It's all love.
Well, welcome to the madness. We're passionate and very much in the constant search for the point guard of the future. Gavin and I actually talked just yesterday about the incumbents on the roster, including Emmanuel Quickley, who we're super high on and would be perfectly content with having be the starting point guard next year. Given Tom Thibodeau's track record, I really doubt that anyone in the draft would become a starter in their first season, especially. But there are some intriguing options out there at the guard for the Knicks to potentially look at. The first one is a guy that I want to talk about because I feel like his draft stock has been a little bit of a roller coaster this year. I feel like he gets mocked to the Knicks all the time because of the Kentucky thing.
Now I definitely know where you're going.
Yes, you definitely know who I'm talking about here. He gets mocked to the Knicks all the time because of the Kentucky thing. I'm talking about Ty Washington, freshman out of Kentucky. For me, I think maybe he has a little bit of skill set overlap with Quickley. Those college assist numbers, I will say, do look pretty good. I mean, 4 assists in 29 minutes per game. That's not too shabby for out of college. There are not too many guys that average much more than that, even really good playmakers. So I'm kind of curious your thoughts on him. I think that the consensus on him seems to have chilled quite a bit throughout the college season. And then, of course, Kentucky gets upset by St. Peter's in the tournament, which is like probably the biggest upset of the whole tournament, maybe one of the biggest of all time. Those sort of things weigh on a guy's draft stock a little bit, on top of the fact that now people are starting to zero in on like, well, he's old for a freshman, so there's a lot of sophomores in this class, or some even juniors that are almost the same age as him, if not younger. So I feel like there's a lot of these factors working against him, but he was a guy that was being mocked top 10 a lot to start the season, maybe just because people wanted to mock him to the Knicks when the Knicks were higher up in the draft order. But what are your general thoughts on Ty Ty? And, how is your opinion on him sort of changed over the season, I guess I should say?
I've cooled on him a little bit. I started out lower on him, to be honest, Alex, and then I sort of came up, especially after that 17 assist game that he had for Kentucky. I mean, that was certainly a nice little showcase to kind of remind people, hey, I'm not just a scoring guard. I can absolutely run the pick and roll and distribute out of it as well, as much as score out of it. But in terms of potential fit with the Knicks, I would agree that he's probably anywhere in that like 11 to 17 range, which is where you guys are projected to be at the draft, barring, any little lottery luck and a late move up. Hopefully for you guys that could happen. Mm-hmm. You hit the nail on the head with potential overlap with Immanuel Quickley. I think at this point, you guys would want to develop him as your point guard of the future. Certainly a nice guy to have playing off of RJ Barrett as well, somebody who you would also expect to be continuing to just have the ball in his hands more and more and more and more as he continues to develop. And Ty Ty, he does fit with multiple ball handlers. He can play off the ball. He's a really good catch and shoot guy, spot up shooter. But I do think if you're drafting Ty Ty, you kind of want him to be, or at least you want to develop him to be the primary guy with the ball in his hands. And I think the Knicks have enough of those guys to at least get enough run with and sort of see what they have. That's why I don't know if Ty Ty is the cleanest fit. And the other point is he's another one of these guards who I don't know how much you want him guarding twos and potentially threes as well on the perimeter. Like IQ is pretty much locked into guarding the ones if he's on the floor. So I don't know about the defensive fit between the two, although I will say Washington is listed at 6'3" with a 6'9" wingspan. He can hold his own, even switched on to bigs, even when sometimes we've gotten caught in the post a little bit on defense. He can hold his own there, but I would think Thibodeau would probably want a little more size next to, or in between, I should say, Quickley and Barrett. So I just don't know if he's the right fit for the Knicks.
Yeah, this is the thing that I keep coming back to with Ty Ty when I think about him, like conceptually. It's like, for one, yeah, the skill set is pretty similar to Quickley, which maybe not the worst thing. I mean, there is, if Quickley does get elevated to starter, like let's say that the Knicks stick basically status quo and just draft who they're going to draft, there is an opening then on the bench for, if Ty Ty could become essentially like Quickley 2.0 or whatever, Quickley, version 2, but not like necessarily an upgrade. You know what I mean? And just pair it with Derrick Rose, that was a pairing that worked great, where Rose could handle the ball more, but Quickley would handle the ball from time to time. It seems like Ty Ty can also do that, play with another guard. That's sort of been one really nice thing about Kentucky the last few years, I think, is that they've been sort of a ball handler by committee. So, guys learn multiple skills, which has sort of always been a Calipari thing to me. But I do look at it then and say, all right, well, what does that mean for Deuce McBride then? Who's another guy.
Exactly.
That fits, he fits sort of in that same box. And it's like, well, McBride showed some flashes too. And so why can't McBride just be Quickley 2.0 in that bench role? And why not spend the draft capital on a different position potentially? Yeah. Or a guy, like you said, that's a little more versatile. I feel like they've got a lot of guys that are like, yes, Quickley has a plus wingspan for a guy who's like measured at like 6'3", and Deuce, same deal. I think he's measured at 6'2" or 6'3", but has that plus wingspan. So that helps him out with maybe being able to stretch out to guard twos. But beyond that, they're not like big multi-positional defenders. And if you just add another guy like that in Ty Ty, plus having Derrick Rose on the team still, it's like, what are you really doing for your perimeter defense at that point? And really, you're just adding a guy with overlapping offensive skills, I feel like.
No, I agree. I think I think there's much better ways to utilize the draft capital. And I think if you are going to go the route of playing more lineups with two smaller guards in the backcourt, that pairing that you just hit on, Quickley and McBride, was certainly a draft Twitter favorite. I will say that for sure. But I think there's definitely upside with that pairing because it's kind of two different styles in terms of like change of speeds between the two. Quickley is much more wanting to accelerate, get downhill, and then go to the runner. McBride is a more measured guard in respects, and then defensively, I think they complement each other really well because of, as you said, McBride's length. He can guard more positions, and I think that McBride, if anything more than Quickley, might be a similar player to what Ty ultimately could turn out to be, right? Like a spot up shooter. He can pass in a pinch. Defensively, might be able to cover a little bit of ground. But yeah, you just have so many similar guys already on the roster to what Ty would be that I think you could even swing for maybe a bigger guard, like a better positional fit at the two versus like kind of going into more of the quote unquote traditional point guard space. Because not to rain on the parade, but any of the other quote unquote point guards we would want to talk about in this conversation, not sure you want to be spending a lottery pick on those guys either. So yeah, I think there's definitely room to hit on a better position with that pick.
Well, that actually really leads nicely into the next guy that I wanted to talk about anyway. We're going to take our first break, but we'll be right back to talk about maybe my favorite prospect in this draft as of this particular moment, Dyson Daniels at the G League Ignite. Big guard, has a lot of tools that could be really useful for the Knicks. But first, I got to remind you guys, today's episode is brought to you by betonline.net. Betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. Let's go Mets. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, from live betting to the playoffs, esports, and more. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. For example, I went on to BetOnline today, checked out some lines, and I tell you what, tonight, much as it pains me to say, it's still some feelings about this particular team, but I'm kind of feeling the Mavs +7 against the Jazz. I understand that they have to go into Utah now and deal with that thin air and everything else, but I don't know. I'm kind of feeling like a +7 after they just scored an upset in the last game. Not the worst, bet to make there, even though they're on the road and probably still without Luka. So I'm going Dallas +7. I would encourage you to do the same. But you can always check all that out at BetOnline. BetOnline, where the game starts. When you say big, a big guard, there's one guy that really comes to mind, and he is like, the more I look into him, I'm like, these guys are like being made in a lab for me, like every year. Like I loved LaMelo Ball, I loved Josh Giddey, and right out of Australia one more time, although playing for the G League Ignite this year, we have Dyson Daniels, who is really playing his way up draft boards. It feels like a very Giddey type rise, where I'm almost starting to wonder, like, is he even going to be available in the Knicks range?
I don't think he will be. I kind of said that to Prez when he was asking me about him on the episode we just did. Yeah, I don't think he's going to be there at 11.
Yeah, but just for entertainment purposes and to let me talk about him because I love him. After only doing research for only like my beginning research, I'm already like, oh, well, I'm head over heels for this guy. But Dyson Daniels, he's a really big guard. He's reportedly, I found an article that was written in March, so just a month ago, that had him listed at 6'8" with a 6'11" wingspan, but has guard skills, like crazy. Yep. The scoring skills, the dribble package, the passing. He's kind of, again, in that do-it-all mold, like a Josh Giddey or like a LaMelo Ball. Obviously not the same player, but that's what you aspire for him to become. Almost notched the first triple-double in G League Ignite history. Came within, I think it was 2 rebounds of it. I think he had 8 rebounds. But, I just think he could be whatever you want him to be. And that's what I love about those sort of players. You throw him out there and he doesn't necessarily have to be the quote unquote point guard, which probably works really well with RJ Barrett. And if you're holding on to Quickley, if Quickley doesn't get, moved in a trade or whatever else, if the Knicks take a swing at somebody or something, if you're running out there with Quickley at the 1 and Barrett at the 3,
Yep.
or, functionally the 3. If you could put a Daniels out there who can has the length to guard whoever the heck he wants on an NBA floor, but also has the guard skills to be sort of your secondary ball handler or even at times your primary ball handler and work alongside guys like Barrett and Quickly that are going to want to handle the ball too. Maybe even we could say for argument's sake, if they hold on to Julius Randle, he'll still be handling the ball some as well.
Yeah.
I think it would just be a perfect player for the Knicks. I think that Daniels could be that dude. So what's your read on Daniels? Even if I concede, I think it's, like you said, probably a really decent shot. He's going to fly up draft boards because people see how well those other guys have been doing, dating all the way back to Ben Simmons. And he's going to get taken somewhere in the top 10 probably. But assuming the Knicks have a shot, what do you think about his fit there?
I think he's really starting to explode up boards because more people have the time on their hands now that the college season has ended to really go back and watch the film from the second half of the year for Ignite, which was technically exhibition games, quote unquote, after the Vegas showcase. But in those games, I think the coaching staff and everybody around him, himself included, really started to figure out how to better utilize one another, how to better complement one another. They all seemed much more comfortable in the court, both ends of the floor. And Daniels in particular, the biggest question surrounding him was the jump shot, right? Not just the open three-point shot, but could he actually knock something down off a 1-2 dribble pull-up? And he was much more comfortable from all over the floor. His finishing improved. As I said, the mid-range shooting improved. The three-point shooting improved, especially over his last 5 or 6 games, I believe. And No Ceilings has some nice tweets from the Twitter account over there regarding some percentages and some last 5 or last 6 game splits for some of those G League Ignite guys. Hardy included in that conversation. But besides all of that, I think with Daniels, when you compare him to some of these other guards or wings that would potentially be in the Knicks range, he stands out because he has an elite skill that he can fall back on, right? He is the best wing defender in this class. And I would fully project him to be able to guard 1 through 3 at a very high level in the NBA, potentially from day one. And that's just not something that some of these other prospects have to be able to lean on. They some of these guards like a Ty Washington, or even some of these other wings like a Davis or a Mathurin, we can put them in the conversation. They don't do one thing quite as well as what Daniels is capable of doing on the defensive end, which immediately props him up. And you talk about the size, 6'7", 6'8", with a 6'11" wingspan, fits perfectly in between what you guys already have cooking there. He's just that connector type of prospect who he checks so many boxes, and he also keeps the ball moving and makes sure that everybody else on the court is involved to the best of their ability. And then, when you need him to kind of be your backup point guard and run some pick and roll offense in a pinch, he can do that for you as well. So he just brings so much value because of his baseline of skills, some of them being elite already. And I think that's what separates him from other prospects.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. There's a part of me that almost would be comfortable. I think the Knicks especially are really trying to hoard whatever extra draft capital they have to make a potential big star trade or something. But if no such trade presents itself this coming offseason, in the form of a Donovan Mitchell or an SGA or something like that they feel like they can actually make a stab at, I'm almost to the point. I think that a guy like Daniels is just the perfect fit for what the Knicks need right now. That I would feel comfortable being hey, team X, whatever, team picking 6th or 7th, if the Knicks end up at 11, which I think is probably very likely that they just stand pat there because those first, 4 picks or so are not super likely to move up in the lottery. But, assuming they stay at 11 or maybe even get jumped by somebody, that would be more likely and end up number 12. But assuming they're there, and have some team that can maybe be interested around the 6, 7, 8 pick and Daniels happens to be there, I'm kind of the mind now where I would gladly throw the Dallas pick at them and just be hey, can we give you 11 plus Dallas's top 10 protected pick next year and move up to get, Daniels, because I'm becoming that big of a believer in him already. I just really think his game would be so perfect,
I mean, that's what we're talking about, better utilizing the draft capital, right? And this is a draft where, if you do want to make a move like that and trade up, you're going to be able to do that. I think a lot of teams are going to be nervous picking in that 5 to 10 range, to the point where if you want to go up and get a guy, I think there's definitely a deal to be made. And I just, there's multiple guards who potentially be on the market for you guys at the point spot, to where I think unless you are 100% confident you're drafting a difference maker at that position, there's just better ways to utilize the draft capital. And Daniels, to your point, Alex, he just covers he just checks so many different boxes for you guys. I think that if you did want to move a few spots to go get a difference maker on the wing like that, I wouldn't hold it against you, because I agree. I'm also coming around very highly on him. I think he's, once you get to like picks 5 or 6, like I think that he really starts to throw his name in and become in play.
I'm curious, do you think, and then we could wrap up the discussion on Daniels, but do you think in a draft where a lot of people are saying, like, I mean, some people are, I think, wrongly calling this a weak draft. I don't really look at this and see a weak draft. I look at it and see a draft that's maybe just a little bereft of potential stars, but full of guys that can make big NBA impacts. Do you think that he's sneakily, because of that physical profile, and like you said already, like an elite NBA skill in the defense to pair with that physical profile and the length, do you think that he's maybe got one of the higher star potentials of any guys in this draft?
Shout out to Chuck at Chucking Darts, in case any of your audience isn't listening to him on the podcast front as well. But he's one of these analysts who is very vocal about size and skill and IQ. When you have a player who sits at the intersection of all three of those things, rarely are they guys who fail in the NBA. And I think that's where you sit with Daniels. And I think in general, it's where you sit with a number of these guys who could potentially be taken in the lottery. I would agree with you. It's maybe not the most proven star power draft. I think if you had to ask me where a lot of these guys end up for their careers, I would say a lot of them are likely, probably lower end starters to like higher level role players coming off the bench. But at the same time, if you grab one of those guys who is the perfect fit for what your team needs, then I don't think you're necessarily walking away disappointed just because you didn't get a quote unquote like second or third option on offense, or even potentially higher in the case of like Paolo Banchero. Like I don't think you're walking away disappointed with something like that. So if you identify your team's needs and you go and you get the guy who best fits that profile with upside like Daniels because of where he sits at that intersection, I don't think Knicks fans would be walking away disappointed if you guys went to take a swing on somebody like him.
We'll be right back to finish up this discussion, including some more intriguing names for the Knicks to consider. Kennedy Chandler, more of a pure point guard, but a guy that maybe also kind of overlaps a bit with Quickley and Deuce McBride, and some other intriguing options, including one that Nathan brought himself that he thinks could be a really great fit for the Knicks. But first, I got to remind you guys, today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. And what more do I need to say about Built Bars at this point? They are the best tasting protein bar on the market. And if you haven't tried Built Puffs yet, maybe you took my recommendation months ago, you bought yourself like a year's supply of Built Bars and you've just been having the standard edition. Nothing wrong with that. They're chewy. They're delicious. They got nuts in them sometimes. They're all, low calorie and high protein. Amazing stuff. All covered in 100% natural chocolate. But if you haven't checked out Built Puffs yet, you might want to place another order, because I think now's the time to give that a shot. I don't know how better to sell this, but it's basically a protein-infused marshmallow covered in chocolate. But in case that's not enough for you, it comes with some amazing flavors like yummy cinnamony churro, coconut marshmallow, and banana cream pie. They're going to be some of your new favorites. They're certainly mine. It's like eating a Malamar, but as a protein bar. It's a bizarre experience, one that I can't fully explain without having you just taste one. So definitely check it out, especially because even though you'd think a chocolate covered marshmallow, even with protein involved, would have a bunch of sugar and stuff, Built Bars don't. Most Built Bars contain just 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 4 grams of net carbs, compared to a whopping 17 grams of protein. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and you can get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. I want to move to another guy, though, and get into sort of an opposite end of the spectrum. We're sort of bouncing back and forth on the ideal size, not ideal size, whatever. But Kennedy Chandler out of Tennessee. I'll admit this is a guy that I've done not a ton of homework on so far. So I'm going to pretty much leave this one like fully in your court to describe him. But, it seems like I don't know if I would say that he underwhelmed this year, but like it seemed like he took a while to get going and really get comfortable at Tennessee. But his last 20 games of the year, pretty impressive stats, like 14.3 points, 3.3 boards, 4.5 assists, 2.1 steals in 31.5 minutes. Shot 48% from the field, 41% from three. And weirdly, this maybe gives you like RJ Barrett like flashbacks, shot 58% from the free throw line, but not on a ton of attempts. So I guess I don't know how much you could totally bank on that or whatever. But he's undersized. He's listed at 6 foot, but reportedly has a 6'7" wingspan. Again, shades of Deuce and Quickly, I think, in terms of a guy that, you know, he's short, but he should be able to hold his own, hopefully, thanks to that wingspan, as long as his foot speed's good and his defensive instincts are good and all that. So what do you think about Chandler? What do you think about, you know, does he sort of fit in that same box with the Knicks like Ty does? Because looking up and down the board again, you know, if we're saying like the Knicks need a point guard still, he's one of the better options as far as like an actual like quote unquote point guard on the board. But I don't know if he's a guy that I would necessarily, as the Knicks, want to invest in over some of the guys that are already on the roster.
There's a giant split in the draft community on Chandler. Like some very smart people who I respect a ton in the space still have him as like a lottery level type grade. I am not one of those people. I think he's much better suited to go back end of the first, early second. The thing that I will say props him up in this conversation and can help him out would be that he did lead that Tennessee team to an SEC tournament championship. And they were a high seed in the NCAA tournament. And it's rare that freshman point guards can capture the attention and the trust of such a veteran team outside of himself and help lead that team to great heights, particularly in a tough conference like the SEC. So that was a very tough thing to do. And yet he knocked it out of the park, did that with flying colors. But you mentioned he's a more traditional point guard, very speedy, good decision maker, can play and distribute out of the pick and roll. Defense is definitely a strong suit of his, is an absolute dog on the defensive end. What scares me, though, with Kennedy, Alex, is every time I scouted him where he had to play teams that had very comparable NBA size all over the place, like Arizona, for example, he shot very, very poorly from the field. And a lot of that comes back to the fact that he shoots a clean ball when he's open, but contested jump shots, he does not get up off the ground with his jumper, and he's already an undersized guard as it is. So a lot of those shots can be bothered pretty easily and or blocked and swatted away. So I'm just not sure how much of the scoring upside he's going to be able to tap into in the NBA, but he does do a good job of taking space when it's given to him. And because of his speed, he's able to take advantage of that much better than some of these other guards we could talk about. And a very, very smart player, very heady guy. But just given some of those scoring limitations and how much that's factored into playing the point guard position nowadays in the NBA, I would be very hesitant to use like a lottery pick on Kennedy Chandler. I think if you guys could find him like, I don't know, early second round, somewhere in there, that might be where you want to recoup that value.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that would be a guy that I'll be interested, you know, if he does fall to, say, the second round, maybe take a stab at buying a pick or something, which the Knicks seem to weirdly never do, even though, like, Dolan can, like, get up off the couch and accidentally find $3 million. You know, they never, so often they let that money expire. I never understand it when people buy second-round picks, like, crazy during the draft every single year. So I'm with you. I don't think that's a guy that I would look at with their, as of right now, their only pick that's going to be on the books, which is the probably 11th pick. I have another interesting guy though, and a tournament case. Not necessarily a traditional one by any means. Sure. Probably more of a 2-guard, to be honest, but you know, someone that has pedigree and who could potentially slot in nicely with the Knicks, and that's Ochai Agbaji out of Kansas, obviously national champion, you know, has a really good resume, you know, 4-year player at Kansas, had 18.8 points, 41% from three his senior year, obviously won the national title, Big 12 player of the year. I think that he could be a good fit next to, you know, Barrett and Quickly again, like I was saying with Daniels. although albeit in a different way. I think that he probably slots in more as more traditionally like a 2 guard, but he's a good rebounder for his position as well. He can do things with and without the ball, but obviously the age, people always scoff at that, and we've seen plenty of good players like Obi Toppin, for example, who's been playing really great for the Knicks. Like, there are some guys that just develop on a different curve and end up, they still have some untapped potential by the time they come into the league at 22 years old. Where do you stand on Agbaji as far as a potential target? Do you think he's worth a lottery pick? Do you think he sort of played his way up there, which we've seen a lot of guys do with great tournament performances? Or do you think that's a guy that you're still kind of keeping more where he was all season now that the tournament luster is worn off a little bit around like the 20s range?
So everybody at No Ceilings but me would tell you that he's worth a lottery pick. I haven't quite come that high up on him. I think he's much better in the mid first round, but I think that's only because there's a number of guys, especially in like the back end of the lottery, who I personally would just rather bet on. But Agbaji is a very, very safe pick. If you would want to go his route, I guess my only thing with the Knicks, Alex, is in terms of play style, he would be so much similar to Quentin Grimes, who you already have on the roster. Catch and shoot 3-point guy. He's more athletic than Grimes. Like, he'd be a much better example of being a flashy baseline cutter, and he'd be like a vertical lob threat on those plays versus just trying to catch and finish underneath the basket. So I guess maybe in that respect, he'd be something a little bit different, but he's primarily going to be a catch and shoot guy in the NBA. I mean, you saw examples of that in the national championship and then later in that tournament run, right? Like when he didn't have to have the ball in his hands all the time for Kansas, when they were having him spot up in the corner or on the wing and they were creating shots for him and just letting him catch fire and shoot it, that's when he was at his best. He was an absolute flamethrower. So he can play off of these other guys that you have in the lineup already, like a Quickly, like a Barrett, like a Randall. But I just don't know if you want to spend a lottery pick on somebody who I just don't know how many different things he's going to offer you than Quentin Grimes. Could he be a better version because of his athleticism than Grimes? Yes, absolutely. But you have something similar already on the roster. I personally would want to go a different direction with the Capital.
Yeah, I and it's funny, outside of a guy like a Daniels, and this sort of like moots the whole discussion here in some ways, but like outside, it's funny because so often, Knicks fans, and it seems like the Knicks front office are kind of thirsty for guards in the draft, like guards and wings. It's always been like the Knicks needs for forever. But I actually find myself more often than not now kind of thinking maybe a big, especially if you're on the outs with Julius Randle, maybe a big is the way to go in this draft or something along those lines. Even if you're thinking of slotting Obi Toppin in there as your starting power forward next year, if you part ways with Randle, he's going to need someone to back him up. That's starting to strike me as the more pressing need right now than like a guard. Even though
you like Mark Williams, he's a popular target for you guys.
Yeah, I'm on the fence about him. I don't know. I don't know how much I believe in like drafting him to replace Mitchell Robinson. You know what I mean? I'm kind of still of the belief that I would rather pay Mitch. And I don't really, I don't know if you think differently, but I don't see Mark Williams being able to play the 4 at all. I think he's going to strictly be a 5. So that's kind of where I'm landing with him because I like Jericho Sims too. So I kind of love the Knicks.
I also like Jericho Sims. So everybody who talks about drafting a center with that pick, I'm like, are we just out on Jericho Sims after 1 year? But the thing with Mark Williams that I've had to come around on too, because for a lot of the year, he was like a back end first rising into like the early 20s kind of guy for me. And I've more recently moved him up. You take a look at these guys. So if you're going to be the rim running archetype of center, right, that generally means it's not just the defensive stuff, but on offense, you have to be an elite play finisher. Like you have to be like 70+% on those shots at the rim, like a Robert Williams, like a Daniel Gafford when he's fully healthy. Like you have to be one of those guys. Mark Williams is that guy. He was an elite play finisher at Duke this year. So he does have some touch from the outside that he's working on. I don't know if he's ever going to be a 3-point shooter, but I think more of the mid-range touch is going to eventually come around for him because he was like 75% from the line. And then everything it gives you defensively. I mean, you want to look for these big men who can play and drop coverage, but they can also recover. They can hedge on the pick and roll. Like you want to look for these guys who can do so many things, not only defending at the rim and blocking shots, but also defending in space at that size with that athletic ability. I think his two-way potential has really popped him into the lottery conversation because of how good of a finisher he is. And I think the Knicks, you guys do need offense in any way that you can take it. And if that's one way you can get it by easily manufactured points at the basket from a play finisher like Williams, I wouldn't look away from him. I think he should definitely be on a board for you guys.
Yeah. I think with Tim's entrenched, and I think that they're going to be invested in keeping him around. I feel like if they draft a Williams, or even if they go, like, let's say Jalen Duren falls, I feel like making that investment with that particular pick will basically signal like Mitchell Robinson's gone. Because it will just be like, we'd rather save the money for a few years and have Sims and, Williams or Duren, at the center spot and roll with that, along with like a veteran. Maybe it's Taj Gibson for like one more year of his perpetual farewell tour with Tibbs, or, maybe it's someone else. But I think that would be what that would signal. I don't know if I'm quite there yet, but I am intrigued by Williams. So certainly if he starts getting linked to the Knicks, I will start doing my homework there. But to close this show off, I was going to talk about Jaden Ivey. I don't know if I've been talking very pessimistic during this whole thing. So I don't know if I want to entertain the idea of the Knicks.
Can I give you a guy of who I think the Knicks should take?
It's exactly what I was going to ask. I was going to say, do you have any other names we haven't talked about today that you're interested by that aren't the pie in the sky fantasy of Jaden Ivey in the top 4?
I don't know how much homework you've done on this guy or how much you've seen of him, but Malachi Branham out of Ohio State.
I haven't done much yet, but I hear the name a lot. So fill me in.
Give me the
quick and dirty.
I've really grown to appreciate his game more. He's a guy who I did talk about with Prez. I actually had Matt Penny from the Game Theory podcast on my Draft Deeper podcast. That episode is live. We talked about Branham. The thing that he offers as a 6'5", quote-unquote spot-up king is what I like to call him, is he's just so efficient in so many areas offensively, to the point where, is he going to be your first or second option on offense at that off-guard spot? Probably not, but he's one of these guys who is so crafty. He's so smart. He's elite on catch-and-shoot shots, as well as rising up in the mid-range and getting, once he gets to his spots, he can rise up and cleanly fire. You can't ignore him on defense, and if you play against him the wrong way, he will absolutely burn you, right? Like, this is a guy who caught on fire multiple 30-point games at Ohio State. Really was from I think like mid-January all the way through. Like, he was without a doubt their second best player, and at times he exploded for more on offense and even looked like a more complete offensive player than EJ Liddell did, who was another like top 20, top 25 talent in this draft. So if you have like RJ Barrett and you still have Julius Randle and you have Quickly getting better on the ball and you have some of these other weapons and you throw Branham in that lineup, it's amazing how teams will look to game plan around him as like the 4th or 5th offensive option for you guys. But you ignore him, you play him the wrong way, and all of a sudden he's got like 25 points in the blink of an eye, and you're just kind of sitting there like, what the heck do we do now? Like, how do we defend this team if this is going to be the guy who's going to burn us? So I think that's one thing that you guys don't really have on the team. You don't have one of these like random guys who can all of a sudden like prop your offense up when like Barrett or Randall or whoever the case may be goes cold. I think he could be a really, really, really unique weapon for you. And that would be who I would look to target in that lottery range, because I think he'll be there in that 11 to 14 range. Yeah,
it's certainly a guy that I'm going to have to do some more homework on and get acquainted with, because that does sound perfect. In many ways, sort of like how Quentin Grimes does. I mean, Grimes maybe doesn't have quite the volatility as far as the, whatever you want to call it, the ability to like explode like that, like what you said. But he did have a couple of games this year where he had a pretty good stretch before he got hurt, where he was flirting with about 20 points every single game.
He's a better passer though than Grimes, to give him credit. Like score. So where his upside ties back into is the pick and roll game. So scoring out of pick and roll sets, he was in the 94th percentile last year. Pick and rolls, including passes, 92nd percentile. So there's more juice to be tapped into with his passing. And if anybody wants to read more about Malachi Branham, our own Tyler Metcalf and No Ceilings wrote pieces about his scoring and shooting versatility and a separate piece on his passing. So definitely a lot of offensive stuff to go read about if any of your audience or yourself is interested in doing a little bit more of a deep dive.
Well, that actually leads really nicely into the end of the show here, because I was going to say, I think we've reached our end of the conversation here. So, Nathan, do you want to remind everybody where to find you on Twitter, where to find all your work and all your colleagues' work and everything else before we sign off here?
Absolutely. So again, Alex, thank you for having me on the show tonight. Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. You can also follow No Ceilings on Twitter at No Ceilings NBA. NoCeilingsNBA.com. Our subscription newsletter is free 99, baby. Just go put your email in there. You'll get draft content every Monday through Friday. We've even been putting out some pieces on Sundays as well. We got Stephen Gillespie, our weekend warriors, we call him. So definitely check us out if you want draft coverage nonstop, and subscribe to my podcast, Draft Deeper Podcast, wherever you get your podcast.
Cool. Thanks so much for popping on, man. Really appreciate all the great insights and a new guy to do some homework on. I feel like every single draft person, I always come away with one new person to look up at the end. So thank you for that. And thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man.
No problem, Alex. Thanks for having me.